Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Swallowed Star Part 189 based on novel. So let's start. The power from the demon god pillar was just too terrifying. Out of the 72 demon gods, only the 5 great demon gods could directly use their demon god pillars as weapons. The tremendous pressure immediately fell on Kia. Even after absorbing so much aura of death and converting it into power of purification, Kia could not help but change in expression. This was clearly an attack Samijina was staking everything on. With a flash, Kia and the 12 holy guards vanished into the Tower of Eternity at the same time. The Tower of Eternity spun wildly as flourishing lotus flowers appeared on the top of the tower and shot towards the demon god of death, while the Tower of Eternity descended to dodge. Every single flourishing lotus flower would lead to a string of explosions upon striking Samijina, but they were unable to stop him. Finally, in the moment the Tower of Eternity landed on the ground, the demon god pillar came crashing down and just happened to land on the tip of the Tower of Eternity. A heavy boom rang out and the elemental storm in the surroundings actually dispersed under this terrifying force. A large number of fiend remains littered across the ground, and all of them came from relatively stronger fiends. The weaker ones were directly obliterated. Struck by the demon god pillar, the Tower of Eternity was hammered 4 floors into the ground. Only the top 3 floors remained visible now. The light that the entire tower shone with suddenly dimmed heavily. Many cracks even appeared in the air. Kia appeared once more and the Tower of Eternity vanished. In the next moment, Kia charged into the sky with the 12 holy guards. The sickle of the god of death flew out of her hand and swelled to 100 meters long in the air, cleaving towards Samijina boldly. Samijina did not try to dodge this blade of purification. Instead, he swung his demon god pillar. He seemed like he actually wanted to take Kia down with him. What a madman! Cold light flashed through Kia's eyes. She immediately retreated in the air. Of course she did not want to go down with Samijina. However, the sickle of the god of death continued towards her opponent. Although Samijina was crazy, his battle instincts still remained. With a flick of the other end of the demon god pillar, he knocked the sickle away. At the same time, at least 50 grey symbols suddenly flew out from the front end of the pillar, directly flying towards Caia. The terrifying power turned into a storm of death in the air. The power of purification could purify the power of death, but it would require a certain amount of time once the power of death was concentrated to a certain level. Samijina clearly did not give her this time. Figures silently appeared before Kia as a series of human shields. Colorful light exploded in the air. Kia grunted once more and she retreated to 1,000 meters away. With a swish, blood spurted from her mouth. At the same time, golden light rose up from her body. Most of the impact had been nullified. After all, an aura of death was unable to truly harm her. However, 6 out of the 12 holy guards had already been torn to pieces by the terrifying power of death. They would only revive themselves in the Tower of Eternity after a given amount of time. Samijina currently seemed invincible. He lifted up the demon god pillar once more. However, he spared Caia this time. He directly swung it at the southeastern fort. The people of the southeastern fort were originally in great joy, but they all witnessed Samijina's transformation in the air. Under a state like that, the demon god of death was just too terrifying. A streak of 7-colored light immediately crossed through the air towards Samijina. It was from Yi Sanmi's divine bow. However, Samijina did not try to dodge it at all. He allowed the terrifying arrow to hit him. The attack, which had instantly killed the arcane demon god Garp, landed on his armor and only blasted open a hole. It did not harm him. Samijina's demon god pillar continued to fall towards the southeastern fort in a ferocious manner. Now, the powerhouses of the southeastern fort could no longer afford to hide their strengths any longer. All of the eternal heroes shone with blinding light. They knew the enemy was unstoppable, but they still needed to take action, or once Samijina's demon god pillar landed on the southeastern fort, it would be a massacre. Even the wall would be completely destroyed. Although the fiends were basically annihilated, there were still over 300,000 demons outside. If they lost the protection of the wall, they would not be able to guard the southeastern fort. Kia's figure appeared once more. She appeared in front of all of the powerhouses from the wall. The sickle of the god of death shone brilliantly in her hand as it changed several times in the air, like it was performing a graceful dance. The domain of purification was immediately withdrawn, pushing her cultivation to the limit. She completely unleashed the power of the self-incarnating domain. The first art, death in childhood. The second art, death in purification. The third art, death scream. The fourth art, death god's kiss. The fifth art, death's silent annihilation. Using all 5 arts, it turned into the 6th art, death in journey. This was Kia's strongest attack. The power of purification turned into a huge blade of light, cutting towards Samigina's demon god pillar. A terrifying collision erupted in the air as countless specters howled out in the air, before immediately being devoured by the power of purification. At least half of the grayness on the demon god pillar vanished under the purification of the death in journey. However, the demon god pillar itself managed to block Kia's sickle. Clang! The sickle of the god of death was flung high into the air while Samigina's tremendous body retreated to several hundred meters away. The aura of death on him plummeted drastically. However, Kia's situation was much more miserable than his. Blood spurted from her mouth twice as she directly collided against the wall of the southeastern fort. She only managed to stabilize herself after penetrating the wall by 30 meters. In order to help Kia block this attack, the 6 other holy guards were torn to pieces as well. Now, she had reached the end of the line. Samigina was just too terrifying, or more accurately, the demon god pillar was just too terrifying. As an existence that had almost reached the levels of super-divine tools, it could still suppress the sickle of the god of death despite being completely disadvantaged in terms of elements. However, Samigina was in no great shape either. Using the demon god transformation and demonic collapse technique took an extremely great toll on his body. He normally would not be able to beat Kia, but in his current state, he completely overwhelmed her, which only demonstrated how much power he consumed with each passing second. After knocking Kia away with this attack, Samigina's body shuddered violently as well as the red light in his eyes showed signs of dispersing. However, he lifted his demon god pillar again and his terrifying aura reached the limit once again. Even if he died, he wanted to drag the people of the southeastern fort down with him. The power of death on the other end of the demon god pillar rapidly surged forward. Even the armor on Samigina had completely transformed into the power of death in that moment, pouring into the demon god pillar. His next strike would be even more terrifying than before, because this was likely to be his last full-powered attack. When the remaining fiends in the sky saw their head use such a method to launch a devastating attack, they all became insane as well. The madness purged them of their fear. Under the lead of the 4 fiend kings, the remaining fiends, amounted to less than 10,000, all charged towards the southeastern fort wildly. The Fiend clan was still the Fiend clan after all. Even after they had been caught in a fatal trap, they still wanted to breach the southeastern fort in the final moment. Samigina had never thought that while he originally planned for the other demons to act as the cannon fodder for his fiends, the situation would be reversed completely. The demon army and demon gods in the distance had no intention of assisting them. The demon army was already utterly exhausted, while the demon gods were close to erupting with anger from their discontent towards Samigina. They only took joy in the Fiend clan's sufferings. Now that they saw Samigina was attacking the southeastern fort without any regard to the consequences, they were obviously overjoyed. Once the southeastern fort fell, they would be the ones who would benefit the most. Did Samigina's fate have anything to do with them? Perhaps, many of their ranks would move up with Samigina and Garp's deaths. Kia's body currently racked in pain as it constantly flickered with golden light. This was clearly the light from the soul-sharing chains. If it were not for the chains, she probably would have been incapacitated by her wounds now. She had never thought the demon god of death would be so terrifying after erupting with everything he had. At the same time, she understood her own mistake. As an assassin, she never should have taken Samigina on in open combat, even when he believed she possessed an absolute advantage. Kia dislodged herself from the wall with difficulty. Now, the 9 Eternal Heroes assigned to the southeastern fort, the 3 Eternal Heroes sent over for reinforcements from the Assassin Temple and the 29th Step powerhouses of the Warrior Temple had all entered the battle. They battled the demons. Among them, Jiu Yonghao, Yi Sanmi and 4 other Eternal Heroes hovered in the air together. All of them pushed their domains to the limit to receive the demon god pillar that fell from the sky. They had gone up to receive it with the mentality that they were about to die. Under his current state, the attack from Samijina had already surpassed the 8th rank of the 9th step. If they did not lay down their lives, how were they supposed to stop such a terrifying power? Yi Sanmi even remembered to look back at Kia and smile, as if he was saying that the future battle would be up to them. No! Kia called out with a shrill voice. She raised her sickle once again with difficulty, but her entire body was in pain. The agony prevented her from using much force at all. All she could do was release the Tower of Eternity again and have it ram against Samijina. However, she was still a step slower than Jiu Yonghao, Yi Sanmi, and the 4 others. At this moment, a silver light suddenly lit up on Kia. Sensing the silver light, Kia was clearly surprised. Afterwards, her emotions immediately settled down. She became more confident than she had ever been. In the next moment, a translucent, white figure emerged from the silver light. With just a single step, he surpassed the 6 people in front and arrived before the falling demon god pillar. A huge, vertical, golden eye suddenly appeared in the air. It shone with brilliant golden light, stabbing into the huge demon god pillar as rays. With a violent explosion and rumble, Jiu Yonghao, Yi Sanmi, and the other 4 were all blown away, while the golden eye that stood 100 meters across blocked the attack that Samijina staked everything in. The Eye of Brahm? In the current world, only 2 people knew how to use the Eye of Brahm, while there was only a single person who could appear here in time using Kia to pinpoint the destination. It was Long Haochen, the chairman of the Temple Union, captain of the Bright Glimmer of Hope, master of the Divine Throne of Eternity and Creation and the Divine Knight of Glory and Leadership. Long Haochen had obviously prepared countless backup plans when he sent Kia here alone to challenge Samijina. The most important one was the attack earlier. He had Kia were connected by the soul-sharing chains. When Kia was injured, he sensed it immediately. He could immediately appear beside Caio through the power of the domain of instant flash. The domain of instant flash alone was obviously unable to send Long Haochen so far away. However, Long Haochen was able to launch this attack when he momentarily appeared using his powerful mental force and Kia as a pinpoint for the domain of instant flash. In other words, the attack was basically a projection of his. After all, they were just too far away. He could not actually transport himself here using the domain of instant flash. He could only rip open space temporarily. Boom! Terrifying power exploded in the air while the demon god pillar was forcefully blown away by the Eye of Brahm. The light from the huge, golden eye slowly subsided and what replaced it was Long Haochen clad in the armor of eternity. In that moment, the morale of the southeastern fort reached the limits. Through the propagation of the magic film, Kia and Long Haochen had become their absolute idols. The 2 idols had appeared one after another and they had repelled Samijina, so it only made sense for there to be a rise in morale. And Long Haochen's attack still had not ended. He raised the huge, golden sword in his left hand and a speck of purplish golden light permeated the sword. He slashed it at the demon god pillar from afar. Immediately, a purplish golden blade of light that only seemed to be around a dozen meters wide flew towards Samijina's demon god pillar. The white sword of eternity in Long Haochen's other hand shone with 9-colored light as it pointed towards the southeastern fort. The sky immediately became golden. It rained. The golden drizzle fell silently, gently falling on the walls of the southeastern fort. Every single warrior and magic user was doused by the rain and a faint, golden glow would appear around them, while the fiends who came in contact with the same golden rain would smoke, causing them to shriek out miserably. Forbidden light spell. Holy Rain. Using the Sword of Eternity as a magic staff to cast the Holy Rain, its power had completely exceeded when Long Haochen used it in the past. The golden rain basically fell over all of the walls. With Long Haochen's appearance, he had basically turned the dangerous situation around immediately. Kia arrived beside Long Houchen with her Tower of Eternity, while Samijina in the distance seemed to recover from his madness. The reason for that was the purplish-golden attack from Long Houchen. The purplish-golden blade of light landed on the demon god pillar accurately. The demon god pillar, where even Kia's sixth art of the god of death, Death in Journey, failed to leave a scratch, now had a huge crack that was over a dozen meters long and several meters deep. Terrifying, purplish-golden light shone from the crack. When Samijina sensed the terrifying aura of destruction, he finally came to his senses. Shocked, he poured his remaining power into the demon god pillar. Rumble. The portion of the demon god pillar that had been attacked actually shattered when Samijina poured his power into the pillar. At the same time, he suddenly threw the demon god pillar towards the demon encampment, while he himself lunged towards Long Houchen and Kia viciously. Despite being on different sides, Long Houchen could not help but secretly extend his thumb for Samijina. He had sensed that something was off about Samijina as soon as he had arrived. Clearly, the arrangements he had prepared had made him descend into madness. After receiving the attack from the power of Haoyue's bloodline, Samijina actually managed to discern the true situation the moment he had recovered. That truly was powerful. Samijina had clearly discovered Long Houchen was not actually present and that he was only a reflection, which was why he broke off his demon god pillar immediately to cut his losses, before throwing it back to the demon encampment to remove all opportunities that Long Houchen could use to destroy it. Clearly, his demon god pillar would not completely be destroyed when only a single portion had been severed. Long Houchen thought about how unfortunate it was, while the silver light on Kia appeared once more and Long Houchen's white figure became illusionary once more. Now, Kia charged towards Samijina alone. Kia utterly hated this person. Samijina knew he would be in for a horrible fate after using the demonic collapse technique. He had actually wanted to blow himself up to protect his demon god pillar. With the sickle of the god of death raised high over her head, Kia's eyes immediately turned white, and that was not all. Even her hair and lips had become the same white as the power of purification. Thrum! The sickle produced a heavy hum, and afterwards, a huge, white figure appeared behind Kia. Afterwards, Kia vanished. The huge figure gripped the sickle of the god of death and suddenly glanced at the sky. With that glance, the sky became a hazy white. Everything on the battlefield froze up in that moment. The white figure gradually solidified and became a tall, handsome man. He seemed to be in his 30s as his long, grey hair draped down. His eyes were also white, while he wore pure white armor. There was only a diamond-shaped grey gemstone on his chest. Even the demon army in the distance had become completely stunned in that moment. It was no longer as simple as pressure. Instead, it was an indescribably terrifying aura. Even the demon god pillars trembled before the aura. The huge figure wielded the sickle and snorted coldly at Samijina, who was frozen in the air. Afterwards, the sickle shot off as a white streak of light, as if he was the only thing that could move in that space. The slash also happened to be so swift, as if it could cut through anything in the world. Samijina gained an additional white mark from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. A large amount of grey air emerged from there, while Samijina's regretful gaze was filled with fear. The man in white raised his sickle high into the air, and the grey gas immediately surged towards the sickle of the god of death. Immediately, it turned into a ring of white light that froze up in the air. The entire process seemed extremely slow, but when Samijina's body completely collapsed in the air and a deathly grey demon god crown appeared in the man's hands, the standstill ended. Everything dispersed in everyone's mind like memory fragments. The person hovering in the air was Kia, while Samijina's corpse fell towards the ground in two halves. Indeed, this was the final art of the god of death that Kia had comprehended by overcoming the final barrier when she screamed out earlier, "God of death!" When Kia was chosen by the god of death, she had gained the 7 arts of the god of death. However, even when she used the 7 arts back then, she would have to pay a terrifying price. Really, she could only use the first 6 arts. There was still a sense of unfamiliarity separating her from the 7th art. This obstacle existed due to the lack in her cultivation and the lack in her understanding, but now, she had completed it. She had finally completed it. After the holy necromancer, slumbering calamity Elux had accepted Kia as his disciple, his greatest assistance was not actually increasing Kia cultivation, but removing all the negative effects and side effects from her sickle of the god of death. This was something Elux could only achieve using his powers as a half-god. The seventh art of the god of death, god of death. This was no longer borrowing the powers of the god of death, but the god of death actually descending to this realm and launching an attack. If Kia had used it before Elux had removed all the side effects for her, the attack would have cost her her life. This was the terrifying power of someone chosen by God. If Longhauchen had remained as the person chosen by the goddess of light, once his cultivation reached a certain level, he too could condense the goddess of light and make her descend. The god of death that Caia had summoned was not an actual person. Instead, she had summoned the aura of the god of death from an entirely different realm and condensing it into his shape, allowing her to launch a devastating attack. However, Longhauchen clearly did not possess this ability now, because his physique had already become a god's physique. The goddess of light was already insufficient to serve as his belief, so he obviously could not summon her. However, this only made Longhauchen's potential even more terrifying. Whether it was through the power from the armor of eternity or by burning his own power, he could reach that level as well. Out of the 72 demon gods, the demon god of death Samijina, who ranked 4th, was dead. As Samijina's corpse fell from the sky, landed in the dust and the dust cleared up, both sides of the battlefield could not help but become stunned. Someone as powerful as the demon god of death had actually been slain on the battlefield, and this was after he had used the demon god transformation and the demonic collapse technique. This was just far too shocking to all the demon gods. The fiends who had been attacking crazily seemed to be on some sort of drug, and its effects immediately seemed to have worn off then. The 4 fiend kings immediately stopped their attacks and flew back first. Their target was the demon god of death's demon god pillar. Samijina was dead, so the new demon god of death would definitely be born from the 4 of them. It was very likely that this would be their only opportunity in their lives, so who could still be bothered to fight against the humans? With their retreat, did the remaining fiends still have any capacity to battle under the holy rain? Their forces immediately collapsed and the remaining fiends, amounting to less than 5,000, rapidly retreated. They flapped their wings and flew back towards the demon encampment. The powerhouses of the southeastern fort pursued for several kilometers and finished off almost another 1,000 fiends, before returning to the southeastern fort. Kia did not return to the southeastern fort. After using the last art of the god of death, she directly fell down from the sky, landing on the Tower of Eternity and vanishing. The Tower of Eternity just landed before the southeastern fort. The huge tower that stood 100 meters tall shone with a gentle glow, purifying the souls that had died on the battlefield and also channeling this power of purification into the tower for Kia to use to heal and recover. Retreat and set up camp. In the distance, the remaining demon gods basically gave an order to the various clans in the army at the same time. They retreated 10 kilometers and set up camp there. After their shock had dissipated, they all various calculations in their heads. They had lost this battle and it was a great loss. The fiend suffered the greatest losses, almost completely annihilated. Even the commander of this army, Samijina, had fallen in battle. The fault for this defeat obviously fell on the shoulders on this demon god of death. Clearly, the southeastern fort was an extremely tough bone to pick. They had all witnessed the terrifying magic arrays. Were there still anyone who was bold enough to continue leading the charge? Moreover, the demon army was utterly exhausted now and their morale had become so low that they were close to revolting. The demon gods could only regroup the army and continue after they had rested up. What they could do right now was to report the results of the battle to the demon god emperor as quickly as possible and ask the demon god emperor to decide what to do next. At the same time, they knew that they probably would not be able to take the southeastern fort. Compared to the demons, the southeastern fort had become a sea of joy. Basically every single human cheered Longhauchen and Caia's names. Their heroes had saved the southeastern fort and killed the demon god of death. In that moment, the chairman and vice-chairman had almost become the symbols of humanity in their hearts. Although the southeastern fort had suffered rather heavy losses in this battle, they did not lose much of their strongest force, while the morale of the demons had reached an all-time low. It would not be easy for them to be able to repeat what happened today. Xiao Yonghao's face was flushed with joy as his eyes were teary. The victory allowed them to see the hope of humanity breaking out of the darkness. The eyes of the eternal heroes shone as well. The victory also allowed them to see the light of dawn in the darkness. The dragon-resisting mountain pass. With a grunt, Long Haochen roused from his thoughts. The armor of eternity on him turned into 13 streaks of light, merging into his body. With a flash, Long Yating had turned back into human form from the king's sword. Before, Long Haochen had used the sword of eternity and Yating's king's sword to use the Eye of Brahm. Coupled with the fusion of the domain of eternity and light god domain, he was able to block the final attack from Samijina. With a rather pale face, Long Haochen closed his eyes once again. He immediately entered a state of cultivation. Yating sat down behind him and pressed her hands on the center of his back, pouring her pure light attribute into his body to assist his healing. Traveling through space and consecutively casting the Eye of Brahm? And the holy rain took quite a large toll on Long Haochen. Although he did not imagine Samijina would be so difficult to deal with, he had finally reached his objective using a backup plan. He had killed the demon god of death. The only pity was that he failed to destroy his demon god pillar as well. However, with Samijina's death and the demon god pillar heavily damaged, it would be impossible for the new demon god of death to reach his same level within the next century. Why was Kia able to appear in the southeastern fort that was so distant from the dragon-resisting mountain pass? It was all because what the Temple Union had managed to accumulate over the past few millennia. There was a spatial treasure that they had saved up, called a fixed teleportation scroll. It could only send a single person to a fixed location. There were only a total of 3 of these scrolls. Kia had used this scroll to reach the southeastern fort, allowing her to hold back the demon god of death. She originally could have taken even more people with her through the Tower of Eternity, but Long Haochen decided in the end for her to go alone after taking into account the southeastern fort's deployment and the tremendous pressure the dragon-resisting mountain pass was under from the demon god emperor. Once Kia had recovered, she needed to use a second fixed teleportation scroll to return. And that was not all the missions Kia had to carry out. The light magic arrays that had played a decisive role in the battle by massacring most of the Fiend army was the handiwork of the Eternal Heroes. While the Eternal Heroes did slumber for thousands of years, they did not spend the entire time unconscious. After all, they still had a lifespan of a millennia as undead. Some of the mags spent a tremendous amount of time studying the elven magic the ancient elves had left behind. They actually managed to make out something. Their greatest gain was an existence called magical traps. The logic behind magical traps was very simple. It was fixing magic to a certain location and setting up a way to trigger it. It could be immediately triggered when the enemy stepped into the trap, or it could be remotely triggered. As long as there were sufficient materials, making the magical traps could even be easier than making magical scrolls. However, it required many secrets of ancient elven magic to do so, which had already become lost in the current age. The Eternal Heroes had brought this esoteric magic back to humanity and also used it on the battlefield. However, there were only 3 mags who knew how to cast down magical traps. After considering everything, Long Haochen decided for them to cast all of their traps at the southeastern fort. Even though the southeastern fort already possessed people from all 6 vocations, the peak forces of each fort still originated from the temple responsible for the fort. The warrior temple and spiritual temple were relatively weaker on the battlefield. Coupled with how overly powerful the Fiend clan under the Samijina's command was, they would be better off concentrating the 3 mags' abilities together to give the demon god of death a surprise instead of spreading out the traps. This also determined the outcome of the battle at the southeastern fort. Although there were a few setbacks along the way, Long Haochen still managed to achieve his objective. With Yu Yi's information ensured to be correct, he had to deal a heavy blow to the demons that they had never experienced before, basically to collapse the morale of the demon army completely, so it would be basically impossible for them to try take the southeastern fort again. Within Long Haochen's entire plan against the demons, the battle of the southeastern fort was utterly crucial. Only by winning that battle could he establish the foundations of all of his battle strategies. If it were not for the fact that the demon god emperor could take action at any time, he even wanted to visit the southeastern fort in person. Night descended, but the southeastern fort remained brightly lit. Their celebratory spirit even led to fireworks within the fort. Under Chiao Yonghao's command, the soldiers even set up great pots on the walls and began cooking fragrant pieces of meat. Aside from forbidding alcohol, the soldiers protecting the fort had plenty of meat and food. Yeah. After an unprecedented victory, how could he not reward the army with a feast? As for the demons, they were much more miserable. After a long journey, they fought for an entire day and night, while the only army that could be considered to be in perfect condition, the fiends, had been annihilated. Even until now, the 4 fiend kings were still fighting over the demon god pillar. Although there were still over 300,000 soldiers left, all of them were utterly exhausted. Most importantly, in order to travel at full speed and that Sami Jino was confident they could breach the southeastern fort as quickly as possible, the provisions of the army was quite limited. Now that they had entered the rhythm of a drawn-out battle, the demon gods were forced to carefully allocate the limited provisions after a discussion. When they sent someone to report to the demon god emperor, they also sent people to the central province to gather provisions. This would be a half a month to a month's wait at the very least, while the provisions they brought could only last 10 days at most. They were forced to ration their food. As a result, even when the demon army was utterly exhausted, every single demon was only given the human equivalent of a steamed bun and a bowl of kanji of food after setting up camp. Let alone meat, they did not even have meat stew. After a battle like that, their morale had reached an all-time low and they could not even feed themselves. The various clans were all furious. However, a revolt did not happen. After all, there were over 10 demon gods here watching over the situation and the demon army just too exhausted. As a result, after eating the food that barely filled their stomachs, a majority of the demons immediately fell asleep in their tents. Some of the demons did not even have camps. They just fell asleep in the wilderness. Fortunately, this was the southeastern fort and not the dragon-resisting mountain pass, or probably just the weather would have claimed lives. The demon god emperor's battle strategy was actually extremely thorough and effective. He had concentrated his strongest elite force at the dragon-resisting mountain pass, but there was a small number of them. Using their strength that had reached the 8th step or higher, the environment was unable to affect them. Although Long Haochen had attracted the strongest powerhouses of the demon race over to his side, the demon god emperor also believed he had drawn the 9th step human powerhouses to the dragon-resisting mountain pass as well. He was not in a hurry to launch an attack. One of his objectives was to give Long Haochen time to gather 9th step powerhouses. The demon god emperor was absolutely certain this would happen. This video will end here.